Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Productive Attorney. My name's Jim Zeta. This podcast is designed to make you more efficient so that you can do the things that you want to do outside the practice of law. This podcast is going to be an update from one that I did earlier called Disrupting the Legal Profession. The earlier one, we talked about how there is a really a nationwide effort going on to allow non-lawyers to invest in law firms. And what has happened is that there are regulatory sandboxes, is what they call them, being set up in different states to try and make it work. And the first one was up in Utah, where they had a very limited set of rules that allowed people who were non-lawyers to do very limited types of things outside the practice of law. The next place that approved it, which was more wide open, was Arizona. And so right as of now, those are the only two states in the country that allow non-lawyers to own a law firm or have ownership interest in a law firm. I talked about in the last podcast about the reasoning that's been given for allowing these to happen is that consumers are not getting adequate service from lawyers. Lawyers are not meeting consumers, especially low-income consumers' needs, and that this would allow those consumers to be treated better. And so my concern was, back then, was that by setting up these non-lawyers to come in and own law firms, that it was a money grab, that non-lawyers have been looking at the legal industry, the amount of money that is generated by the big law firms, and trying to figure out a way to get in and get a piece of that. And my other concern was that without adequate regulations in place, that when non-lawyers own law firms, that there will be the concern of the client be put secondary to the monetary interest. So that if a lawyer has a choice of doing what's in the best interest of the client or doing what's in the best interest of the investors, that they do what's in the best interest of the investors. That's an oversimplification. I think that it's a much more nuanced argument than that, but that's kind of where we were at. And so there was a lot going on in terms of different states trying to get this in place. And the biggest ones that were traveling along pretty quickly were California and Florida. And my feeling back then was that if California or Florida went ahead and approved these, then that would be the major domino that would allow this to go forward. So I went ahead and I've been following this very closely, especially the California State Bar and their committee. Their committee has met multiple times, and because of COVID, they've recorded many of their meetings and many of their presenters. And I've gone ahead and reviewed the ones that I found interesting. I went ahead and looked at. I've looked at the reports, and the kind of the fascinating reports to me within that committee were the one report about England. So England allows ABS, allows these structures to be in place. And I was wondering, and they've had success with it. And I'm wondering, how is it that they've had success? And the presentation pointed out the heavy regulation that goes into place of these different companies and how they've matured and what has happened. And for example, if you're an ABS and you go ahead and get approved in England, you have to have a minimum insurance of £2 million, which is the equivalent of over $2 million per client, with an unlimited overall cap. And they say that in many instances, that insurance is very, very expensive and costs 5 to 10% of gross revenue. Well, if you're an investor, that's something you don't like, and that's something you don't want, and I have not heard any discussion about that. They also have a fund set up that if a business goes out of business, especially smaller law firms that are owned by non-lawyers, that they have a fund in place that can come in and help if there's something happened to the trust fund, if something happened to existing cases, where they can take them over and run them. There are heavy regulations in place. If you have to get approved to have your website approved, you get a little badge, and if you have that badge, then you're okay with them and with the English service, and you have to go through that. So that was impressive to me that they had gone to all those lengths, and as a result, you do have some real success stories of firms that have been able to tap into areas where the consumers have not been served properly over time, and are able to go ahead and attract market share, but at the same time solve consumer problems. The examples that come to mind that they give were a company that it's called Amicably, where if you're going to get a divorce but it's amicable, they walk you through all the steps. And also another one about if you farewell for people who pass away, they have a way to set up a will, they have a way to get you funeral services, they have a way to set you up for probate. Those all sound great, and if you have all those regulations in place, that may work. But my concern was I don't believe that in the U.S., especially with the current political climate, that regulation is something that people want or will allow to happen. And so instead of what you have in England, where you've got really good safeguards in place for the consumer and safeguards in place to prevent bad things from happening, we're just going to be the Wild West. And so I was looking for signs as to seeing from some of the presentations and some of the articles as to whether or not, what direction we were going. And so I've found some signs, and I want to update everybody. The first Arizona ABS to be approved was approved in January of 2022 this year, and it was Elevate. Elevate Services got approved. And what I found interesting was their CEO, Liam Brown, go ahead and gave an interview. And in his interview, he doesn't hardly talk at all about consumer services. He says that his quote was, "I don't anticipate we will come up with a ton of services or offerings," close quote. So it's not like they're out there trying to help with exactly what the consumer needs. He says instead of pursuing growth, exploring merger and acquisition opportunities is more pressing concern. In other words, hey, can we buy other companies up? How can we go out and grow? And he says, the question we have as a management team is, should we continue to do this and grow slower to being a pathway to $1 billion business, or should we raise capital, either private equity or public market, to fund some acquisitions? That to me is investor speak for, we want to become a monster. We want to become publicly traded. We want to go in the stock market. We want to be a $1 billion business. We want to buy it and sell it to make ourselves a bunch of money. And without regulations in place, that was my biggest concern. Again, he's in the article saying we are mindful that the next step for us, if we raise significant growth capital, will either be as a public company or with a private equity investor that we be able to support the strategy that the management believes in. In other words, we're keeping both doors open for private equity or public listing. All these talks about how we're going to make a bunch of money, and that to me is my greatest concern. Is how is it that these companies can go out and become an ABS and figure out a way to make a bunch of money. And what the way I see that they make a bunch of money is commoditized legal services, and have it be ultimately Google and Apple and Amazon come in and set up their own law firms and make lawyers just employees, and we lose what the profession brings with the ethics and with the safeguards of the clients. That is a concern I have. So What's going on in California? Well, California had several meetings, several presentations. The excellent committee was doing the work that they could. And in December of 2021, politics got involved with their committee. The Senate and Assembly Judiciary Committees sent a letter on December 7, 2021, pretty much saying disband the committee. We have a bunch of concerns with this. We don't want you to go forward. And to the State Bar's credit, they said, no, we really aren't going to disband the committee, but we take your concerns seriously. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make some changes to the way we do things. And so the changes that were recommended in a report that came out last week was that the board, first, that they revised the membership to limit it to those who have California-specific experience. They recommended that they eliminate subcommittees because they had 2 subcommittees, and they wanted to revise the charter, and so they're revising the charter to how to reduce the risk of corporate interests coming in and unduly influencing or compromising the professional judgment and objectivity in the delivery of the legal services by the attorneys. In other words, how do we keep money out of it and from polluting the system? Again, I think UK has the answer with their heavy regulations, but that's not the way we do things in this country. They also wanted them to focus strictly on the sandbox and get out of the change in the disciplinary rules that would allow non-lawyers to come in. And then the committee is supposed to give a report, and they were supposed to give one by a certain date, and they're extending that deadline, and they didn't say what they're going to extend that deadline to, but they're extending the deadline. Overall, what I see is what the committee has done is what has happened is politics has come in and curtailed the committee and curtailed what they can do going forward. So it is a step back, a slowing down, but not a complete halting of the regulatory sandbox in California. So where else was the other one? Well, there was a big concern as to what was going on in Florida. And Florida had not concern, and I don't want to be anti this. I want to make it as objective as possible. But the issue was, okay, is Florida going to go the way of Utah and Arizona? But it did not kind of go the way that the proponents of this would have wanted to go, because the bar came back and said, we do not believe that fee sharing and minority ownership proposals are good. And they rejected the concept of a statewide lab. And so that was the leadership of the state bar sent that, or the board of the governors of the state bar made that decision. And that was a unanimous decision. So Florida has taken a step back. Their board of governors of their state bar has said, we really don't want this right now. We're not looking into that. And that was in November of last year. So you've got Florida and California who have stepped back. So where else do you have? Well, some of the other places that are looking into it are District of Columbia, North Carolina, and Michigan. North Carolina is looking at a Utah model. But none of those have progressed and had progressed as much as Florida and California. So bottom line is, what was humming along pretty quick and what got some real momentum, I actually think COVID slowed it down in that people just had more time to think, more time to look into it, and said, when they had time to think about it, they thought, I don't think we're ready for it. And I think the reason why we're not ready for it is we don't have, like England has done, we don't have a nationwide group coming in and saying, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this right. And if we're going to do this right, we are going to go ahead and have a nationwide program in place that provides substantial regulations to prevent this from getting out of hand. And so since we don't have that leadership and that momentum going forward, that's why I think you're starting to see people who are getting educated saying, wait a minute, there aren't enough protections in place here. We seem to be doing this hodgepodge, and it just doesn't seem like it makes sense. I will tell you, there was a presentation given by a lawyer in the California committee that I watched, and she had a small business. I think it was called Hello Divorce. She gave a presentation just a couple months ago to the committee, and it was interesting to watch as she talked about how hard it was for her to raise money for this because of all the regulations in place. And all the reasons, unauthorized practice of law, where you can't have someone talk to someone at the beginning of a conversation who is a non-lawyer and give any sort of legal advice. They specifically mentioned that anybody who called them from Texas, that Texas was starting to get upset with them because on these initial 15-minute phone calls, there was concern that they were giving legal advice, and so they've had to change the way they have these initial 15 minutes with clients to make sure that they're not talking about legal services or give any sort of advice that would constitute legal advice. So this entity, which is operating out of Utah and is trying to grow and has $2 million worth of seed money, is severely hamstrung by the regulations that are in place, and people are watching this, and competitors are watching this to say, well, wait, they're cheating, they're going beyond what they should do. Cheating's a strong word. I think there's rules out there, and we've got these regulatory sandboxes in place where people can try things, but when they try and they don't have the regulations in place and different states can start to curtail it, I can understand why these entities are having so much difficulty to make it happen. And to watch in UK and to see the way that the regulations have gone forward and helped people and provided those services is interesting, and I think there are benefits to there. The other interesting part of the presentation on England is that people were concerned that the big four accounting firms would come in and just become law firms, and that has not happened in England, where they've had the opportunity for the big four to come in and really create their own law firms. What they've done is they've hired lawyers to complement what they do, but they understand that certain law firms have specialties that's too expensive for them to provide on their own, and they still ship that out to big law firms who have the niche services and can provide the services for their clients. So some of the things that you worried about, that I worried about openly, was Apple Law and Amazon Law and Big Four coming in and take over, haven't materialized in the UK. Primarily because I think those businesses like to focus on their core business, and once they get into the practice of law, they understand it's a all, like all businesses, it's a little more complicated once you get into it. So kind of a high level view at this point is simply that this whole process appears to be slowing down, that people aren't as interested in this, making this happen. There's still some huge market forces out there that are going to continue to push it, and hopefully what the proponents are hoping is that they can get one of these big state bars to fall, and then the rest of the state bars will fall. But we're running into real problems with it. I really think that the biggest issue is just the way it's being gone about. I think it's the only way you can do it in the United States, given that we have 50 state bars and 50 independent organizations, and the ABA really can give model rules and can come in, and they've kind of talked about it generally, but without a group coming in and really saying, okay, we see this really issue, and we're going to put together a nationwide program that we're going to get through Congress, United States Congress, and the Congress approves it. And when the Congress approves it, then we have all these regulations in place, and then we put these regulations in place to protect the consumers. And once that occurs, then we'll go to the individual state bars and the individual state legislatures and have them make a decision as to whether they approve it or not. that's got to happen. And I will tell you, in this political landscape, there's just, the two sides can't agree on anything. And so for somebody to be able to cobble together a consensus on this and to be able to push it through in this particular political climate seems highly unlikely. So I understand why the proponents are doing what they're doing and the way that they're doing it, and they've made tremendous progress given the hurdles that they have. But it's it looks like currently like it's stalled. That while they're pushing and they're continuing to find different jurisdictions, they're not getting the traction that they need to make it happen. And so Elevate's got a UK ABS in place, and it's working real well. So they're just kind of dipping their toe here in the U.S. and seeing if they can make something work. It remains to be seen whether they can. So that's kind of the update we have on disrupting the legal profession. It is not as the sky is falling as I would have thought in 2021. It looks like lawyers are becoming interested in this and protecting their turf a little bit more. I will say, having that UK presentation that was done in the California committee really had an impact on me. I will say that when you put together the market, and the market can come out and truly, using the data that now that we can get through the internet, can truly determine a consumer's needs. And when I say consumer, I mean all consumers. Consumers that have $10 in their bank account to consumers that have $10 billion in their bank account. You can use the data to figure out what they need, and your business will go towards that. And using technology that's out there, existing technology, or creating technology, and on top of that you can layer AI, and you put all that together, you can really do some good for people, and you can really provide some services, which is what we as lawyers ultimately want to do, is provide services to our clients in a professional manner, do it at a fair price, and get them good results so that they can go on and live their lives and do things that they need to do. Help them with their problems that they have, help them with the transactions that they have, help make their life a better life so that they can live life and pursue their goals and their dreams and their happiness. And that's the value we bring as attorneys. And I think there is, on the greater good side, the ability to achieve that through these mechanisms. But what you have is what we seem to have in this country often is the profit motive then trumps the greater good motive. And unless and this is my opinion, unless you regulate that profit motive enough that allows people to not abuse the system, you're going to have problems. And so, my kind of conclusion is I'm kind of glad it's slowing down, and I wish that the groups that are proponents of all this would look at it on a more nationwide level and see if they could get a consensus nationwide. I think they've tried that, and I think they can't find it, and so this is their only other solution. And to the credit, they made substantial progress. So that's the update on disruptive legal protection. I will keep my eye on it. I will continue to do podcasts from time to time, letting people know. But that's where we are. Thanks. Have a great day.